Resilience is a skill. I think we are a culmination of our skills. And like anything else, if you want to strength train, you want to lift weights. If you want to become more brave, you need to embrace fear. And if you want to become more resilient, you need to embrace stress.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons from the Field. I'm Gina Casazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with the SEAL. Today's guest, I'm super excited about. We met on Substack. Oh my God, his articles are incredible. You guys got to get on the Substack. Let me just tell you about this guy. He is a lieutenant commander. He's an audiologist for the United States Navy, leading research on hearing protection and communication systems at Naval Air Station Pax River. A resilience instructor for 10 years, he also holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and is a certified fitness leader. In 2021, he set a Guinness World Record for most chest-to-ground burpees in 3 minutes. How cool is that? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really excited to introduce you to Kyle Shepard. Kyle, thank you so much for being on the show.
Gina, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Oh my God, really, the pleasure is all mine. First of all, big fan of your Substack. Your writing is fantastic and it's super relatable for the show. I mean, that's why I'm really pushing these listeners to hear it and go there because you not only write about it, you not only teach it, you do it. You're in the thick of it. It's not like I did it and now I'm teaching about it. Like you're still doing it all. And reading your Substack and listening to a couple of podcasts, I came to my own deep diving questions that I want to get into for you. And I want to start with intentional stress because you talked about it a lot and you write about it a lot. And being that this podcast is all about testing your resilience and your grit, I think that this is probably the best way that we on our own can learn to control stress when, life just comes at us. So let's talk about intentional stress and why you believe that adding controlled discomfort into our daily lives is key to growth.
You're starting with my favorite topic. Thank you. This concept I do write about the most because I've become very passionate about it. Since I was a kid, I've been very interested in stress and stress management just due to family dynamics, friends, family, communities I was a part of. You see chaos around you in your life no matter what. But you'll see people respond to it very differently. And I was always curious as to why. Why are some people very calm in the storm and others, same exact stressor, respond very differently? And over time, through school, majoring in psychology and speech and hearing science, eventually becoming an audiologist in the military, and then getting into resilience instruction 10 years ago, I started doing deeper dives and looking into it. And I've come to the conclusion through a lot of great evidence and experience. And thank you, by the way, I do believe in credibility. If I'm going to preach something, I better practice it. And I've always looked up to people who do that. So I want to experiment on myself as well. But resilience is a skill. I think we are a culmination of our skills. And like anything else, if you want to strength train, you want to lift weights. If you want to become more brave, you need to embrace fear. And if you want to become more resilient, you need to embrace stress. So like a muscle, training with manageable temporary discomfort and having prepared strategies that can provide you experience to build the muscle that is resilience. I always wondered if it was like an innate thing that we have, like you're born just more susceptible to being a warrior, if you will. And don't get me wrong, genetic variability is important, but again, resilience is a skill and it comes into experience. And you hear the stories of people with tough childhoods, and you wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, but sometimes past experience can cultivate a resilient mindset. Not always. We know tough childhoods can change the trajectory of a life in a bad way, but prior experience absolutely can contribute to resilience. Support systems, another big one for sure. I like talking about perceived support. Sometimes not even having objective support from people around you, but just knowing people are there to support you is another big factor in resilience. But the last one is develop strategies. And that is a controllable. We can also create our own experience if life is not giving it to us, because it will eventually. But if it is something that can be trained, and there's a lot of ways to cause the stress response, if the goal is building resilience, you can take advantage of a lot of these beneficial pursuits with the primary objective being building a resilient mindset. So you can start thinking about translating. Maybe I'm resilient in the physical realm. I can translate that to the mental realm, the social realm, or other dynamics in my life where sometimes we see people who are exceptional, whether it be an athlete or you name the domain. They are very resilient in one way, but it does not translate as well to other parts of their life. And it can come down to simple things like support systems, prior experience, and developed strategies. So conceptually, I love the concept of intentional stress. And I intentionally use the word stress because I think that's a word that can be reframed. We tend to put words into buckets, good or bad, and have negative connotations. And stress is one of those things that has a negative connotation, but stress is neither good nor bad. There is eustress and distress. And really, that is a choice in the moment. And the power of our mind and our decisions and reframing a situation, whether it is in our control or not, provides resilience. So stress is something that we can embrace. And again, if we cause it intentionally, train the muscle and cause plasticity that is our sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically our emotional brain and what we evolved from, that allows us to respond to chaotic events.
So you said something interesting that I'm curious about. You said, it's something you've always been curious about. You've observed since you were a child. So was your childhood a chaotic one where you and how were you like as a child? Were you more, like you said, it's a skill. So was it something that you observed and then observed within yourself?
You never want to compare any situation. Like the worst thing that's ever happened to somebody is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. I love that quote. And it's so important because we tend to judge others based on their stressors and how they should be responding. Or sometimes even worse, we judge ourselves and how well we're doing in response to a circumstance that maybe doesn't feel, based on our past experience, as significant as someone else. But really, because of the reasons we've talked about, support systems at that time, prior experience, and or developed strategies, there's your variability in people, and of course genetics too. So I had a great childhood, all in all. Fantastic parents who loved me. But my sister is a social worker, and when she was in school, she was tasked with creating a family tree. So that was really cool, learn about our family history, but her task was making that family tree color-coded for things like mental health disorders, substance abuse disorders, and other factors that could influence dynamics in a family from that perspective. And we joked that when she finished, it looked like a Christmas tree. So it was lit up with all those colors. So I did have exposure in my extended family in particular with some chaotic events. But I think that's true of everybody to varying degrees. But I got to see huge variability in how people function in response to the same stressor. And also true in my community, true in sports. And I became inspired by people at a young age, reading books on military history. You obviously interview a lot of operators, special operators. I loved those books growing up and learning about these normal individuals. And another part of the podcast that I love is you talk to these perceptually exceptional people, which of course they are, but they come from very normal beginnings oftentimes. Jim Foreman just on talking about how he's 138 pounds and a guy next to him looked like Lurch. And all the exceptional athletes who had incredible bodies on the outside were gone pretty quickly. But it was the inside that really differentiated people. And I've always been inspired by mentality being a differentiator that goes into resilience. So I was very curious as a child in that. And I started looking into mentors, both in my near area of influence and outside of it through books and sometimes movies. And it just continued. It's always stuck with me. And it's interesting how I've come back to that, even though I came into the military as an audiologist, but then fell into resilience, which I often do more now these days than actually some of the audiologic stuff.
It's interesting because it wasn't until my 20s when I really was able to take a step back and see myself and be like, oh my God, like, why are you acting like this? Like, why are you losing your mind over something that seems so trivial, right? And it's funny though, because I grew up in an 100% Italian family. I mean, everything is just a bigger deal than it really is, right? And they're extremely loud and everyone's always screaming. And it's just like that type of environment. And it's funny because my parents have this dynamic where my mom like needs to be in stress mode in order to operate, you know, Whereas my dad, like, I don't think the guy's ever been stressed out in his life. And it's like kind of crazy because, like you mentioned, you could be going through the exact same thing. And there are times where, as you may know, as a parent, your kid gets hurt or injured or something happens, right? And two parents are handling it in a completely different way. We're like, my mom is like freaking out, and my dad is just like calm, cool, and collected, like nothing. And I look at that and I'm just like, my gosh, like, how do you live this life? And and it's funny though, because my youngest brother's like that too. We're like, nothing bothers him. And for yourself, like, how did you come to observe yourself? And what do you have for people that are like, I want this, like, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to control myself I think you mentioned this on one of the podcasts too. There's not much time before you react, right? It's like, it's pretty instant, and you need to be able to catch yourself and be like, oh my God, it's happening, to stop myself and not, go into that reaction mode. So how can people practice this, and how can they start observing themselves without judgment?
We are a culmination of our skills, develop strategies for better or worse. So what you said resonated with me, because growing up in chaotic situations, high stress environments, we learn a lot through our observation. And as a father, I know from my previous experience, and of course, reading all the time, what I say often is going to have much less impact than what I do. So I observed a lot of chaos, and I'm old enough to where I grew up in the time where culturally we still really pushed mental toughness from an undercase S in stoic perspective. So suppress it, push it down, and keep functioning. Suck it up. Do not talk about your emotions and push forward. And don't get me wrong, that is a good perspective to have when safety is on the line, or you need to accomplish a mission and it's not time to think about emotional intelligence. But even in those situations, we live in stimulus response or stimulus reaction mode. And I like differentiating response from reaction, because it's whether we have conscious control of what we're doing and why. So one of my favorite things, and as you said, intentional stress challenges, there are so many. I love every domain of stressor, because just coming back to physiology real quick, our emotional brain, where the limbic system is, that sensory system comes in, the brain is activated to initiate the stress response. It doesn't differentiate what the stressor is. It could be caused physically, socially, mentally, spiritually, and it could be from outside factors that we have no control over, or something that we caused on purpose. So there is no differentiation. And knowing that is very empowering, because we are prone to plasticity. We are a culmination of our skills that we can train. But I think the most important intentional stress challenge that you can start with, and it doesn't sound that hard, but in my experience, it's very hard, is self-reflection. And genuine, honest evaluation of yourself was not something I was good at for the longest time. I was very much stimulus reaction. Something happened, and my developed strategies, which were not optimal most of the time, put me into emotional state. And I did and said a lot of things in my past that I am not proud of. I could also make an excuse and say my developing brain was not fully there yet. What is it, like 26 years old? The average brain is fully developed. So that prefrontal cortex that's in charge for our rational functioning, that is a susceptibility of being younger. But there are amazing individuals who are quite young who get on the path earlier than I did. But self-reflection will review a lot of opportunities, whether it's journaling, whether it's talking to loved ones, or just thinking about what are my current strengths? What are my current weaknesses, or what I like to call areas of opportunity? What are my fears? What are my true values? There's this exercise that I did 10 years ago when I was going through the training in the military program called COSC, or at least the Navy Marine Corps program, Combat Operational Stress Control, which is what I was trained in originally. And I've taken it and ran with it in different ways through the different commands that I've been at. But they had this exercise, core values exercise. On the paper were 100 different attributes or values, and they all look great. So think in the Navy, we talk about honor, courage, commitment. Think about wisdom, integrity, love, all these beautiful words that you'd like to think, man, I'd like to be all those. We were tasked with pick 6 out of that 100 that most apply to you, that you think are most important to you, and write those down. So we were given 10 minutes, hard exercise to really narrow that down. And then after that, we were tasked with, okay, now rank order them 1 to 6, how it aligns with what your true priorities are in life. even harder yet after narrowing that down. What I've done with that exercise since then, because I do like to practice that with people that I work with, starting with understanding your why, but then truly reflecting on yourself, because one of the biggest stressors that we can have subconsciously is not living in alignment with our values. A lot of people don't even look inside themselves to think about what their values are, let alone if their actions are aligning with it. And the internal conflict that you could feel subconsciously from that is just going to be another weight on top of everything else that's happening in your life. So I like thinking about, how are my actions truly aligning with my values? And if family, which is my number one value right now, is that, are my actions not only aligning with my perceptions, but having those difficult conversations with my spouse or other people in my life to make sure I'm meeting expectations on their side? So these are not easy reflective questions. They're not easy conversations, but it is the start of opening up every opportunity in your life to understand yourself and start improving in whatever area is most beneficial to you.
Talked about in the intentional stress, when you were talking about that on the podcast and stuff like that, you talked about the various different ways that you've put yourself through it and how others can. You talked about cold exposure, and you talked about fasting, and it was physical. There was some physical stuff you mentioned as well. What's one intentional stress challenge, I guess you could say, that might have surprised you the most in its impact?
I start with self-reflection with everyone as a way to explore opportunities. I love the quote by Bruce Lee: absorb what is useful, discard what is not, make what is uniquely your own. And I always say that when I give briefs in the military, when I write about it, because I could give you 20 different ideas, but don't take all of them. Pick one or two that most apply to you and run with that. But to answer your question, for me, I love fitness as a vehicle for developing resilience. And there are many ways to train fitness. I know I used to exercise, meaning without conscious intention, I would go to the gym, fart around on different machines and think I earned the day. Crazy, but I didn't have much progress in many different areas. I stayed in shape. I was functionally fit. I was an athlete growing up, but I didn't start training, differentiating from exercise, until I got into the resilience realm. And coincidentally, I started getting more fit in different ways that aligned with my goals, whether that was for martial arts, of course, when I was training for the burpee stuff, and some other things I've done since then. But adding intention to your actions can really change the environment and the activity that you're doing. So there are many different types of adaptations that you can pursue in fitness. It can be strength, stamina, endurance, power, all kinds of stuff, even skill, like throwing a football. That's a skill. That's a physical skill that you need reps. The more you do it, understand the mechanics, the more you'll develop the muscle memory and the plasticity to become better at that skill. For me, I love muscular endurance adaptation exercises like isometric holds. Again, long story short, a plank and holding it for as long as I can. And I originally started doing that when I thought I was going to go for the hour burpee record, which was my goal before I pivoted to the 3-minute, when I didn't know that was a category that was going to be much more achievable for me. So I was training for an hour and my shoulders were wearing down. So I was like, hey, let's do some prolonged planks and see how that works. And I learned that stress is not linear. So you get into an isometric hold, and I've been known to give safety stand downs on intentional stress and stress management and have the whole crowd stand up with me and get into the horse pose, which is basically holding that squat pose halfway through with your knees pointed out. And then we just sit there. And then I keep talking to them about the body will start feeling urges, whether that's from other challenges like fasting from food or from your vices, or I like talking about fasting from devices because of technology being so addictive these days. We often are victims to our urges. And when we feel a sensory signal, our brain will interpret that as an emergency. Particularly, don't get me wrong, we live in an amazing time, but we've gotten quite comfortable and we've become susceptible to wanting to maintain that comfort too much, not being comfortable, being a little uncomfortable. So intentionally causing that discomfort can be a great lesson in building resilience. So when I start feeling fatigue and pain from my thighs when I'm in that horse pose or when I'm in that plank pose and holding for as long as I can, the fire alarms are going off in my brain. And it's telling me, hey, you're in pain, drop. And my body starts shaking. But if I focus in and know that I've been in that position for that long before, whatever my personal record is, and I'm trying to go 5 seconds longer, I focus on something like intentional breathing and nothing else. It's amazing how close I get to breaking that wave of stress. And then my body works through it without breaking the hold. So I learned stress is not linear. I used to always think as I was feeling more and more stress in response to whatever the stressor was, it could be a hard conversation with someone I love. It could be, of course, fitness. It could be just feeling hungry. You see how many people in this world change their character and their attitude because they're tired or they're not feeling good or they're hungry. I would argue, don't get me wrong, you need to eat after a certain amount of time. You need to drink water, of course. But as soon as you feel this urge, that is not an excuse to change your functioning. You're okay. You can go for a little bit longer, and then testing that and being more comfortable with that discomfort. There's many cool benefits, of course, behind exercise, behind intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting, cold exposure, reported stuff that sometimes is controversial, sometimes not. Those are all byproducts, in my opinion, for the benefit that is resilience training. I like using these vehicles to first and foremost master your urges, master yourself. And then if there's other byproducts from those pursuits of benefit to you physically, mentally, socially, spiritually, heck yeah, stack those skills, stack those benefits. But the reason being resilience and self-mastery of your urges, that's the intent. And that's why I love the plank, because it doesn't take too long to start feeling that wave, work through it, and then you realize you can do harder things next time around, and then use the progressive overload principle and exercise physiology of, okay, I got here. Now I need to extend. I need to add more stressors to that environment as I get more comfortable with what used to make me uncomfortable. So keep moving the needle. We initially start with manageable discomfort for a certain amount of time. As soon as we get comfortable there, I don't keep doing 1-minute planks every day if I can do them easily. I need to push that. I need to make it hotter when I'm doing it. I need to add weight to my back. I can do a lot of things to change a stressor to enhance the skill that is resilience, and then take all the added benefit on top of it.
You mentioned training and exercise. How did you make the distinction between training and exercise, and how would one of our listeners go about doing that?
Intention. So conscious intention behind what you're doing and why. Again, self-reflection is the first part of it. Awareness. You can never fix a problem. You can never move the needle without conscious awareness. I mean, I'm guilty as anyone is going on autopilot sometimes, trying to turn my mind off, go through the routines of the day. But the more conscious awareness that you have of what you're doing and why, the more efficient you're going to be, the more aligned you're going to be with your values, the more effective you're going to be in whatever your respective mission is with your life and family, with your job and colleagues, with your personal pursuits, you name it. So adding intention to my training, whether that was trying to get better at burpees in a certain amount of time because COVID had hit and I couldn't train in jiu-jitsu. If that didn't happen, I wouldn't have been pursuing that goal of setting a record. That was just basically a challenge from one of my good friends saying, you won't do it. And then that's a good way to convince me to try to do something while I have anything else to do during a pandemic where I can't train mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu. An exercise physiology principle that I like quite a bit is specific adaptations to imposed demands, or the SAID principle. And it basically is an explanation of plasticity. So the more you do anything specifically, the better you'll get at it. If you sit on the couch all day, your body is going to optimize itself at trying to sit on the couch in detrimental ways to you and your health, but that's what it's trying to do. It knows the stimulus that you're providing, and therefore it's going to change accordingly so it gets better at doing that, so it can get more comfortable at doing that. If you want to get more comfortable doing hard things, do hard things. If you want to get more resilient, cause stress. And I love that idea. And then adding in what I talked about already, once you get a little bit more comfortable using that SAID principle in whatever way you're trying to build resilience in whatever areas of opportunity you have in your life, stacking those skills. If you want to get a little bit more comfortable in social situations or talking in public, do that at a manageable level in whatever way makes sense. And it's my favorite thing that I do working with people is developing progressive challenges that are very manageable throughout it, to go from scared or incompetent to pretty damn competent eventually over time. And you look back and you're like, holy cow, I'm a different person now, only half a year later, because of that SAID principle and progressive overload principle. It's fascinating. Plasticity is amazing, but it goes in both directions. There is no such thing as stagnation or just maintaining a level. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. And that feels overwhelming for some people, but it doesn't have to be, because the challenges are all manageable at your current skill set. But it takes conscious intention in your activities throughout a day to add benefit to wherever you may be and whatever you can do in whatever realm you're trying to get better at. Physically, mentally, socially, spiritually are the four I like to break down, but we can get creative and name other ones that are areas of opportunity for you too.
This podcast episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. Podcast guest Nick McKinley's company, Deliver Fund, brings you guys Thrivers Coffee. It is ethically sourced, it's organic, and it supports traffic survivors. That is right. Thrivers Coffee is all about empowering us to making a difference in the fight to end human trafficking. That's why 100% of the proceeds go directly towards their goal of bringing freedom to victims of human trafficking. So if you guys love coffee that is organic, ethically sourced, and tastes absolutely delicious, and want to help to end the fight of human trafficking, check out Nick McKinley's company, Thrivers Coffee. So you talked about like that drop, you know, like in horse stance where your body is just ready, and same thing with plank, right? Now, and I'm curious in terms of this world record, right? I love the fact that someone said you can't, and you were like, please, like I have nothing else to do, right? Like that's why I joined the Navy SEAL program. I had nothing else to do. Like that was it. It was too much money and too much time.
And look where we got you.
You know, and it's just so for yourself, like what did that teach you about like perseverance, mental toughness? Also, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, that being that you mentioned it's during COVID, like your family's home with you. So they're watching you, your kids, and they're watching you like go through this training and all this stuff. Like walk us through like that experience and what the challenge taught you, what it taught your like, especially you just mentioned kids, they're impressionable, they're watching you, they're seeing you go through this, right? And then also like, what were some difficult moments throughout it? And did you do it like first time? Like how did this walk us? I'm curious now.
I'll do my best not to make this story too long because there's challenging aspects of the whole process. Of course, COVID was a challenging time for everyone. So my wife and I had just transferred from Guam to Maryland, where I live now. I almost got stuck in Guam with her already stateside, and we were going to be separated for 6 months, which was nuts, just due to dynamics of what had happened when I was checking out when the shutdown hit. So we got through that. We came to our house, and it was 6 months before I even met my supervisor because base was shut down that hard. I was not seeing patients in clinic, which is typically my job on top of many other aspects of audiology. But at my current duty station, it's all things research, development, test, and evaluation. So I was learning the job in isolation, talking remotely, doing Zoom meetings, and it was a wild time. But we also had my middle son, brand new baby boy. My daughter was 3, and we just moved to the other side of the world, getting settled in during what was chaotic time for everybody when things are shut down. By this point, I had been training in mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu for several years and loved it. I had a connection to a gym nearby, but it was shut down, so I couldn't train. And I wanted to do something to stay active, but I didn't really have a set intention. So I bought a bunch of workout programs. I was doing that. That's when I got the challenge from my buddy when he saw a record online about the hour-long burpee record. And we had done a challenge. We had done a bunch of physical challenges in Guam, and one of them was 50 burpees a day for 50-day challenge.
Okay.
And burpees used to be something before that challenge that I avoided from when I made my own at-home workouts. So I could do them. I would get through them when it was given to me for the workout of the day. But it wasn't something that if I was getting after at home, I was adding in. That caused me to be too tired. I was trying to do that. But I'm a pretty competitive person, particularly with myself yesterday. But if my buddy's trying to be competitive with me, let's go. And so was going hard, and we were competing at how fast we could do that. I couldn't do 50 in a row when we started. But I broke it up into sets of whatever it was, took brief periods of rest. And by the end of the 50 days, I could hit 50 pretty hard without break. And I'm not able to beat this guy. He was a pretty high level CrossFit athlete and a professional fighter since he was 18 years old. And he is bigger than me, stronger than me, and faster than me, and has beaten me in most things in my life. But I was able to get him in this burpee challenge, which felt pretty good. At the end of that, I became pretty adapted to that exercise, and it became something that I could recover doing during other aspects of exercise. So when he read about that record and he sent it to me and said, "You won't do it," I found a new goal, a new intention during what was a challenging time at home, because we are still getting used to having 2 instead of 1 now. We are getting used to the dynamics of me trying to work on top of getting settled into a house that needed a lot of improvements, and also just the chaos that was COVID. So it's a pretty special time for me because I was using the morning as a time to train. And my daughter she would wake up early with me. She was an early bird back then. She likes to sleep in now. My sons are the early birds that crawl over me in the mornings and add different ways for me to have stressors on top of other beneficial pursuits in the morning. But she would get up with me and come with me downstairs, and we'd either have coloring books for her or whatever. And I would have a good hour before the day started, if not more, to plan whatever training regimen I was doing. And by this point, I was getting pretty good at programming too, from my experience with JJ in Guam, the guy who challenged me. And so, yeah, she sat there with me and she got to experience my training and my evolution of getting close to being able to do that record. And it's when things started opening back up that I actually found a different gym here in Maryland in June of 2021, reached out to the guy and went to an open mat, trained with him for a bit and told him about this pursuit. And it was that team that actually helped me record the record attempt. I learned a lot about Guinness. I was a big fan of Guinness, and I still am growing up, those books and all these cool records. They're a business like anything else. So there are different routes for submission. There's a paid tier, and you can pay a lot of money for an expedited review, having someone watch you do it and then get told the results right away. Or the non-paid tier, which you won't get communication for a month when you ask a question. It takes 3 months to review your results, and there's a lot of requirements behind submission. So my first attempt, I did well. I beat the record, but there were a few things about it that I was questioning. And I didn't want to get no rep. I didn't want to potentially get told I had to do it again. So we did it again the following weekend, and I did 1 rep less, but still beat the record and just saved out on the side. I did my first submission. It took 4 months to determine everything, and then they no-repped me for many because of my form. They didn't give me a lot of explanation. They just said form rules, you didn't meet the requirements. And when I read what they said, I looked at a picture of the current record holder who was doing the exact form that I emulated from video. So I resubmitted with my second attempt saying, here's the pictures of your current record holder, here's what I did. And then 4 months after that, they accepted. So administratively, in many ways, the whole process for comms and difficulty with submission was as challenging as the training itself. But it was because I didn't have jujitsu or anything else to do. So it was a little challenge that I gave myself, like, hey, I did all this work. I have this team behind me now trying to help me. Let's see if I can get it, even though the process added so much to my fitness. It's funny how like the external validation of getting this certificate that means nothing from the business that is Guinness got me a lot of recognition from people. But I've had other pursuits where I tried to get a squat record during a recent shoulder surgery because all I could do was squats for about 4 months. And I got really good at air squats during that time because I couldn't do anything upper body. And I went for the 1 minute air squat record. The transformation of my legs during that time is more remarkable than I did with burpees. So I beat the record by 4 on the video, and they no-rep me a handful just based on their vague rules. And at that time, I was already ready to train again, and I was like, I'm all good. But I actually am more thankful for the squat attempt than I am the completion of the record because of how much more fit my legs are now from that setback. So again, long story short, to answer your question, one of the main lessons I learned was setbacks can be opportunities. Whenever something happens, we can pivot and find opportunities within chaos based on things that are still under our control. And I love the concept of control because in this world, we'd like to focus on our stressors quite a bit. But more often than not, we don't have any control over our stressors. We might be able to communicate, which is always under our control, great. But really, it's just acceptance or avoidance. And if you can't avoid, it's either acceptance or misery. The control that we have in our life is in response to our stress or our perspective. And I like to simplify things because I have a simplistic mind. Really, I like to break down, there are really only 2 things in this world we have control over. And you hear a lot of people say it's our thoughts. I don't know about you. I don't control some of the thoughts that come into my head. I think some wild stuff sometimes, especially when you're under stress. Things come into my head. I mean, you think it, I've probably thought it, as dark as it could be, as ridiculous as it could be. I don't know where they come from. I get great thoughts that come to me sometimes too for writing, and it shows up. Like Stephen Pressfield writes about the muse. But I don't control my thoughts, but I definitely have control over the interpretation of my thoughts, the judgment of my thoughts. So when something comes in my head, taking that stimulus and then my either reaction without thinking about it or my response, thinking about it, taking a pause in whatever the thought might be, interpreting it with whatever perspective is most beneficial. My thought interpretation is the first controllable. Second would be my subsequent action, of course, what I do next. And the more you do that, like anything else, the better you get at it. So practicing, okay, what am I feeling? Why? Cognitive flexibility, what's going to be most beneficial for me? Because again, most of the things that I regret in my life, whether it be actions or words, are from reactions. They're from being in an emotional state, not realizing it or not even being aware of it and contemplating it, and then just reacting. But if you can stop, insert time, whatever is necessary between stimulus and response, you get a lot better at it. Never perfect, but a lot better at it across domains.
Being that, resilience leader, right? And you take a lot of actions towards doing, everything that you're preaching. It all comes from your own experiences in life. You not only have the military background, but the jiu-jitsu and Guinness World Record. And you're, like you mentioned, you're really big into the physical. We're going to segue now to fatherhood, because you talked about like your daughter watching you and all this stuff. And as your kids are growing up, like what principles are you applying in, I guess, fatherhood to your children, to develop kids that are resilient? Because I mean, as you mentioned, we do have it good. Even like like I was talking to someone the other day, and he helps kids in Africa go to school. And here in America, it's non-negotiable. It's like, everybody goes to school, right? So over there, though, what a privilege, right? And we take it so much for granted. And because we live in this world where we have pretty good. We have it pretty good. We don't have to walk 1,000 miles for water. Everything's pretty instant and accessible to us, right? So how do you, and what principles are you applying into your being a father, into your children to have kids that are resilient?
First of all, thank you for the compliments you gave me initially. I definitely do try to stress test any knowledge that I've gathered from mentors, from books, and people that continue to influence me in my life. But I deserve very little credit. I have amazing people around me. I mean, we stand on the shoulder of giants. A lot of our thoughts and things that we do are just really repackaged knowledge and wisdom from the past. But I do believe taking knowledge that is out there, that I love quotes. And you could say the same thing 100 different ways, but one of those is going to resonate well with you. And it probably is going to be a very different one than me. So finding whatever knowledge resonates most with you, fantastic. But you can have all the knowledge in the world. It's not wisdom until you apply it. So I'm a big believer in obtaining your own credibility, deriving your own competence so you can truly have confidence, and then let that compound in other areas of your life. So again, thank you for that. But I deserve very little credit other than trying to live up to some of the values and virtues of people that have been in my life or people that have inspired me through reading. To answer your question with fatherhood, again, trying to simplify it down, I do believe, of course, in talking to them in concepts like explain the why. And I like calling everything a mental state like I do on Substack. And I was really proud earlier this winter. My daughter was at the playground with some of her friends, and it was kind of chilly outside. And one of the girls was like, oh my gosh, it's freezing. We should go inside. And my daughter's like, no, we shouldn't. Being cold's a mental state. And I was like, heck yeah, I mean, that's awesome. We talk all the time. But what I say is far less important than what I do. So setting the example. First and foremost, I think a big principle for me is loving their mother. So I believe I'm not a great father if I'm not a great husband. And that's easier said than done because life is hard. And sometimes marriage is not easy. But I bring that back to myself and trying to control what I can, be accountable for everything in my life. And I've told many stories on Substack, and I'm working on others. And as you know, I can tell a story for a while, so I'll save us the time today. But I am working on one right now that tells one of our origin stories that helped us evolve into the couple that we are. And it has to do with a loss, actually, of our first child in first trimester. And then that led to a lot of change, and it was very beneficial for us. Again, setbacks can be opportunities. I never wish loss on anybody, but the difference between disorder and growth often is our response, and that those resilience components, again, of experience, support systems, and develop strategies. The worst thing that's ever happened to somebody is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. But setting the example, first and foremost, as a husband is very important to me, so my children can observe what being a man is, not only for me individually in my pursuits, but in my relationship with their mother. Second would be setting the example in my actions, not only when they're around, but when they're not around. Becoming a father changed me. I've always been a good guy, I'd like to think. but maybe not the highest of integrity. And that has a lot to do with many excuses that I could make. Integrity, of course, is doing the right thing even when no one's looking. I believe that my children, even if they are not actually looking, they could know, or they are looking in some way, shape, or form. And I want to live up to deserving them every day. And I do want them to be actually looking, so I try to keep them around as much as possible. If I'm not at work, if I'm coaching jujitsu or the functional fitness classes that I do, 99 times out of 100, they're coming with me. So they were there when I did the record attempts. There was a challenge a few years ago. What was it for? I can't remember the organization, but the challenge was 830 burpees in a month. I was like, I think I could do that in an hour. So I trained for a little bit, and I was able to do 859 in an hour. But my favorite part of all of it was this video that somebody took at the end, and all three of my kids are sitting along the wall and they're cheering. My wife had this really nice post about it, just reflecting on it, but having them around, observing how I respond, not only to the physical pursuits that I love, but really how I treat others, how I treat myself. And my wife's so good about setting the example for things like emotional intelligence, like talking about her feelings and what she does in response to them. I think one of the main tenets of being a good parent, or trying to achieve being a good parent, is setting the example in all ways that you rationally know is beneficial, and then trying to live up to it to the best of your abilities. We make mistakes, but reflection, intervention, optimization. There's my why. Everything what I do, my martial arts, resilience even, which I'm very passionate about, it's all comes back to being the best father and husband and man that I can be. And if I can go to sleep at night knowing that I've tried for that, helps me sleep pretty well.
It's funny you mentioned in the beginning, like quotes, right? And how things can be said a bunch of times, but like there's just the way someone phrases things or the quote. And this was a perfect segue to this section. In one of your articles, there was a quote. It's, "I'm not okay, but I will be." Can you talk about that? I thought that was very, very powerful, and love for you to touch upon that one.
Core memories. We can establish them in many ways, and fulfilling pursuits, we're going to remember much more than pleasurable pursuits. I like talking about those two concepts. Fulfilling pursuits usually involve hardship, adversity, whether we cause it ourselves with some sort of big adventure, like going to SEER school as a civilian, or whatever it might be. We can cause our own challenges and overcome them and become a different person. So respect to you for doing that, Gina, because you absolutely set the example in that way. But obviously, we can have other core memories from prior hardships that life gave us, and again, will give us in the future. And how we respond to that, we've talked about the variants already. So in Guam, after I started training, we had a team of about 100 people, amazing individuals. I love the culture of Guam. I love the people. It will always have a special place in my heart. And there were so many individuals in that gym, really improved my life and were mentors to me, both on and off the mats. But there was one guy in particular, when I was still a white belt, he was a purple belt, and he moved up to brown around the same time I moved up to blue. But he was a father of a daughter, and she was 12. And my Evie was, I want to say she was 1.5 at the time when we started getting closer. And we would talk about fatherhood quite a bit, particularly being dads of daughters, and how special that was. And just the love he would talk about that he had for her and the relationship that they had. And I got to know her before I met her just through his stories about her and their special relationship. But he came to me one time, said that she's had this weird flu symptoms for a while that weren't making sense. And as an audiologist, I know sometimes ear infections get overlooked. That can lead to fever and other flu-like symptoms. So I was like, hey, let's bring her in to the hospital on the weekend. I can get you guys in there, check her ears out. If it's not that, we'll have her get seen in our minute clinic, our weekend clinic, and be evaluated. So brought her in, got to meet her in person, and she lived up to everything he said. She clearly wasn't feeling well, but sweetheart of a girl. Couldn't have been more respectful, more considerate, and also just even a little bit of humor, even though she felt like crap. Her ears were clear, got her down to the clinic. They said, yeah, probably some bug, but wouldn't worry about it. It had been 7 to 10 days, so it should be wearing off soon. Apparently, she told her dad after that I love places like this. When I get older, I want to be a helper like those people. I want to help people, whether it be medically or in some way. Fast forward about a week and a half from there, she kept having weird symptoms. One night, she had an extreme headache, very concerning headache. And so they called 911, ambulance came. And on the way to the ER, she lost her vision, or maybe it was in the ER. Sometimes I forget this because this story is so hard for me to tell, and I haven't told it in a while. I've told it so many times, but it's still difficult. So that in the ER while they're waiting, she says to him, "Daddy, I'm scared. Dad, I love you." And he says, "I love you too." And then she goes out. Whether or not the symptom she was having is related to the brain aneurysm that had burst inside of her head, we'll never know. But she passed away that night. And he lost his 12-year-old girl. And I have 3 children that are alive. I've also lost 3 children, which is, it's always crazy for me to say that I have 6 children, but only 3 of them have been born. And a few of those losses came after Ilea passed away. And as I mentioned, my first loss influenced me as a father and a husband. But this loss, after getting to know Gary the way that I did and getting to know Ilea and her story as a father of a new girl, it profoundly impacted me. And I do like to talk about contemplation of death, not only from previous experience, but in general, because anything is possible. Tomorrow's not given. And while it is morbid, it's also a really big perspective setter that, I mean, a lot of our stressors are not emergencies. They're not life and death. And I remind myself of this regularly. And I remember Ilea and other things that when I'm having a hard time with my 3-year-old son, with him being an absolute maniac and acting just like me and looking just like me, which probably drives me crazier yet, that stress response is not necessary. Tomorrow is not certain. It is like, let's change our perspective, and we can still parent, we can still set expectations, but at the same time, we can still love, we can still live every day to the fullest and not let something in the grand scheme of things that's not that big of a deal ruin a day. Because again, the uncontrollables, and when our time comes, we don't know. Gary, of course, like anyone else, struggled. But what really affected me too, he came back to the gym. I can't remember how many weeks after Ilea passed, he came back during an open mat. And of course, everyone hugged him, but he pulled me to the side. And he was just sharing stories about Ilea with me. And then he says to me, "I'm sure you're probably really struggling too. You need to know her in that moment and see her. I just want to be sure you're doing okay." This man who had just swallowed the toughest pill life could give to you was checking in on me a few weeks later after her passing. And I just sat there like blown away. And like we're crying together, of course. And he and I still talk regularly. And he's a father of 2 beautiful children now. He and his wife. You talk about resilience. They are of they're a faith, beautiful Catholic family, so strong faith, strong family support system, prior life experience. But again, whether it be martial arts, the beautiful relationship that they had those tenets in place to respond, not optimally, because no one's going to respond opposite to that, but to respond effectively and work through without it ruining either one of them or the relationship. And it's obviously that's not the case for everybody, and that's okay. But they demonstrated resilience in response to something I know is possible, but I still can't imagine. And that I reflect on that to this day and try to live up to her life and the opportunity that I have. And of course, while remembering anything is possible. So very tough time. But what he told me, to your question, when I asked him how he's doing, is he said, "I'm not okay, but I will be." Yeah, I've told myself that it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to reflect on that, but still knowing that you will be, still knowing that whatever time you're supposed to have here and within your control is still how you respond and how you act. That just believing that you will be okay and having a mantra like that, holy cow, no matter what life throws at you, you'll still live to your fullest. You'll still earn it. And I like trying to think of living my life to the fullest for those who no longer are able to because their time came. But yeah, mantras like control what you can. I can do hard things, or when you are struggling, I'm not okay, but I will be. It's just so empowering.
Yeah, it's very, very empowering, that line. And obviously, like you said, it just, some things just stick with you, right? And then it becomes your thing. Like then you take it as when you need to, like I have a cup. It's from Fourth Wing, the series, book. But it says, "I will not die today." And at some point that cup's going to be wrong. But like, it's just when it's my like resilient cup. Like when I'm going through stuff, I say 2 simple things. It's like, nobody's shooting at me. That's one of the things that I say, like, nobody is shooting at me right now. It's not that bad. And then, I will not die today is like, you're going to get through it. It's going to be fine. Like, and if you do, and this gets wrong today, doesn't matter tomorrow. You don't have to think about it. Right. So, but going through a loss, especially something, it's traumatic. I mean, I just did a Substack post about I was supposed to go with my mom to LA, and I ended up getting a couple speakings, and I had to cancel that trip. But I'm spending extra time with her and all this stuff. And everyone's like, unnecessary. Going to see you in 2 weeks. And I go, are we? This is not guaranteed. Like, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Like, I hope so. Chances are, yeah.
Right.
But there is a small chance we won't. And I don't want to live with that regret. And you mentioned earlier, you mentioned like, in the very beginning, we talked about intentional stress. Then you also mentioned the word intentional breathing. Now, for yourself, is there a certain breathing technique that you do in terms of count, or is it just anything as long as you're focusing on your breath?
Real quick, I love that post that you made. I also love that
Thank
picture of you and your mom. You have great genetics.
you.
Mom's very
Thank
pretty,
you.
so you can let her know. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, conscious breathing. We talk about, like I mentioned, how self-reflection is my favorite intentional stress challenge. When it comes to stress management strategies, I always say my favorite, first and foremost, is intentional breathing. Again, all of this means nothing without self-awareness. So that is always the first thing that I talk about, either with resilience or stress management trainings that I give. So we need awareness that we are under the stress response. And then we can differentiate stressors from stress and all of these different things. But just knowing your stress is indicative of needing intervention. And while I like reframing negative thinking patterns and asking questions and doing all sorts of cool things that can help take us from an emotional state to a rational state, which is the end goal of stress management, and help recovery. Because another thing I like to say is the difference between resilience and burnout is recovery. I mean, you have a stressor, and no matter how mild or severe it is, it needs to be managed. We need to be aware of it because we have a lot of burdens that we're not aware of. And then we need to recover from it. If we never recover, we eventually will burn out. No matter how resilient and tough we are, we need to recover in whatever domain that stressor is impacting us. But after awareness, physiologically, things happen in our body when the stress response is initiated, and breath rate changes are one of them. And a way to kind of consciously tap into our subconscious, because the autonomic nervous system does control breathing. We tend to inhale, exhale at whatever rate our body tells us to without conscious presence of it. So to answer your question, just simple conscious awareness of your breathing can help in many ways. But there's some really fascinating research out there. I like Andrew Huberman's podcast, The Huberman Lab, but there's a lot of other publications and books that I've read. Things like boxed breathing. I read a book called On Combat by Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman, I believe was his name. Phenomenal book about the evolution of our training in the military, make people more prepared for combat. And it was beautifully done from a psychological perspective, to make training environments more realistic, to make survivability and lethality much higher. But at the end, it also talked about stress management. It was almost like the book culminated in talking about box breathing. So standard box breathing, remembering the number 4. So inhale for 4 seconds. I love inhaling through the nose, hold for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and just going in that box, if you will. There's some good evidence behind something called the physiologic sigh too. And again, all of this is just disrupting the physiologic response that happens because of stress. So physiologic sigh is a full inhale, again, ideally through the nose, take it to perceived capacity. And when you get there, attempt to do another inhale, add a little bit more in whatever way you can. So a full inhale and then one more. So 2 inhales followed by a prolonged exhale. And the prolonged exhale is what I always emphasize. When it's for stress management, you're going to activate that slow down system, our parasympathetic nervous system, on the exhale. Hyperventilation comes from oxygen coming in. Decreasing in our response comes from carbon dioxide going out. So focusing on the exhale, making that longer than the inhale, has been shown to, in a variety of ways, whether it's box breathing or physiologic sigh, slow down our stress response, moving us from emotional to rational. And then when you want to cause a stress response with intentional breathing, we can do that too and take box breathing. Instead of 4 seconds, let's do 8 inside of the sauna and things like that, where I now use conscious breathing to expand maybe my respiratory system and my muscles, and use breath work to be a stressor rather than stress relieving.
As a resilience leader, what do you recommend or what do you suggest to our listeners when they're stuck in a rut, or to just, to what do you suggest to our listeners to do on a daily basis to overcome the challenges, like to be resilient for when these challenges come? I ask this question every single show. You think I'd get it right by now, but but I guess for you, I'm asking a little different because you're a resilience leader, and I'm just really curious on, from your perspective, like, what are the actionable steps that you recommend that someone should do just to be resilient for those challenges?
I like to define resilience as the ability to effectively manage and eventually recover from stress. So resilience does involve stress management. That's our response to the inevitable stresses in our life. Again, I repeat myself often because repetition will hopefully encourage absorption of the most important concepts. Awareness first and foremost. We can't intervene and optimize what we are not aware of. So self-reflection, introspection, all imperative to understand where we're at, how we are functioning, what our performance level is, to indicate whether we need to lean on support systems or maybe even ask for help. We talked about that old mentality of mental toughness. Asking for help. Back in the day, you were judged. You're weak. And that's still inside of me in some way. And I have to battle that. Talking about your feelings, even with your significant other, that was something I continuously have to work on. I'm an audiologist. My wife's a speech pathologist. You would think we're expert communicators. Because of me, no, we still need to work on that sometimes. But looking for those opportunities and a genuine reflection of those opportunities in yourself. So when we need to ask for help, that is strength. So knowing I am not recovering, my performance is degraded. I am a liability to myself and my team, and it's not getting any better. You are strong if you ask for help. You are weak if you don't. The old school mental toughness leads to burnout. It leads to bad cases that we know are possible for anyone, including the most exceptional individuals in the world, when life inevitably delivers them hardship that is difficult to overcome from. We need support sometimes, and that is strength. So assessing yourself first and foremost, using stress management to recover. But when you're in a recovered state, again, long story short, if you are in a pretty good place, and that doesn't mean without stress. I hope everybody experiences stress every day. Do not guard yourself from stress. Stress is good. You cannot be resilient without it. You need to experience it and recover from it. Leading to my answer, cause yourself manageable discomfort. And that doesn't mean you have to go be some fitness fanatic. It can be anywhere. When you know that you have an area of opportunity in your life and the general domains that, of course, could be fitness. And I am biased. I love fitness because fitness will challenge you physically, mentally. It can be socially if you do it in public or in isolation based on where you're more comfortable or not. And spiritually, because my goodness, when I'm holding a plank for time beyond my personal record, I am testing my soul. My mind is screaming, of course, my body is screaming, but it is my soul that will help make up for the capability detriment that I've gotten to because I'm pushing my limits. So I do love fitness, but it can be mentally, it can be socially, it can be in a variety of stressors that all lead to the same conclusion or the same outcome, which is enhanced resilience, causing plasticity in that system, getting a little bit more comfortable, making yourself uncomfortable, managing those urges, whatever it may be. As you know, I love writing about this stuff. And it's endless opportunities based on where your unique opportunities lie, and then pushing the envelope a little bit with deliberate discomfort.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Thank you so much for being on the show. Everyone that's listening, really check out the Substack. And, Kyle's Substack is really, all the questions came from the articles that I have read from his, but he also does challenges. He built a great community where, you can feel supported while also challenging yourself and putting yourself through these tests. And that's one of the reasons why I had to get you on here, because you are not only living it, but you are building a community of people that want to also embody the resilient mindset and go through that mental fitness and body, mind, and spirit and everything like that. So thank you again for being on the podcast. You're absolutely fantastic.
Gina, thank you so much. As you know, I'm equally a fan of you, your Substack, and my goodness, your podcast. Being on and talking to you, knowing the guests that you've had that I admire, books that I've read, It's so cool to be talking to you after I'm so used to listening to you talk to these amazing individuals. So it really is an honor to talk to you today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you again for being on. And I'm going to, like Kyle said, repetition, it stays in your mind. Go check out his Substack, be a subscriber for it. You're going to get a lot out of it. He built an amazing community, and check out our Substack. I'm going to equally say it. It's completely free. We are doing the same thing and in different forms, but it all comes down to all about building a world that is resilient and that is strong mentally, physically, and emotionally. Thank you guys so much, and I'll tune in next Wednesday.
Resilience is a skill that can be trained. Thank you again.
I love that. Thank you.